welcome. Hi, I'm glad you're here.
Hi, I'm glad you're here.
Yes.
Yes, we couldn't do it without you.
Welcome to you.
I should mention that Paul is our audiovisual expert. Without his expertise, these videos would be very, very different, meaning much lower quality in every way. So we've got him to thank for his millennial expertise with audiovisual technology.
It's fun to do it, but with my color blindness, Terry helps.
Yeah, that does come into play once in a while, but we've got that worked out.
Yes.
So if you ever saw a video where it was
Green or something.
a little too green, it's because he has red-green color blindness. We all have things to deal with.
Yes, I know.
It's our karma. All right, let's get to work here. We've got more exciting stuff today.
You do.
Session number 58.
58. Wow.
And we're in the middle of a long explanation here. So once again, if you are landing on this video without having seen number 57, please go back and watch the part that has to do with letter number 92 and start from there to get the background of where we're going to continue today. In that session, number 57, for those of you who have seen it, I will just give you a real quick refresher. He was talking about several enemies of HPB, Alcott, the Mahatmas, and theosophy. Over the years that the Theosophical Society had existed, they weren't afraid to take on projects. And as we learned last time, one of their very first projects, even before HPB got to America, was to use spiritualism as a platform to launch. And they didn't even have a name for it. It wasn't called theosophy. It's the ancient wisdom teachings. What are some of the other terms that we use for that?
The one religion.
Right? But it's the philosophy that has existed for hundreds of thousands of years, even before humans had the ability to understand anything that deeply. And it's what the Mahatmas have used in every civilization to get things going and to set things up. So cleaning out spiritualism was a major goal for several years. We also learned last time that there were actually 3 enemies that had developed, and most of them because they had been revealed by HPB under the direction of the Mahatmas to be unscrupulous and unethical and dishonest. And they were not happy with that. But the Mahatmas wanted that information out in the public, and poor HPB gets to deal with the results because the Mahatmas are hidden back behind the scenes. She's out front and she gets all of the slings and arrows, but she is more than willing to do that. She is so devoted to the cause that they've asked her to participate in that she will do absolutely anything for these Mahatmas that she absolutely adores. So she gets all of the problems.
She knew it and she signed up for it willingly.
She did, and she would do it again and again. She said, "That is my only purpose in life. Anything I can do, if it kills me, I will do it."
This is an example of somebody who knows her dharma, which obviously she does, and she's willing to do that with all of her willpower.
And one more thing that in her mind was going to help the cause was a strange marriage to a man who was not in any way her equal, mentally or spiritually or in any other way. In fact, he was an adventurer, basically, who came from the country of Georgia and was hoping to make it big in America and wasn't doing too well. But he said he was going to take care of her and help her in the work, and that didn't turn out well. We learned about John King. So if you don't remember, go back and watch that section. Very interesting, a spirit guide that had appeared to numerous mediums, both in London and in America, and someone that the Mahatmas, at one period when HPB first arrived in America, used as a means of communicating with her. because it appears that they didn't have that great of a facility at that time. So they used whatever means they could to convey information. She was fairly psychic, and she had learned also how to do basic phenomena, but she hadn't learned yet some of the more advanced techniques of phenomena. Those came later. She was still learning herself. We also learned that she had a terrible problem with her leg, and the doctors said, "You've got to get that amputated, get that leg off, or you're going to die." She said there was no way that she was going to go through life with only one leg, and she said, "If I die, I die."
And I think I know this to be true, that she's not saying that because of anything egoic. It's because she knows that she has a mission to do, and being impaired by a physical disability would hamper her mission. She needs to be as able-bodied as possible, even though she's not as able as other people based on certain health things. But she needs her legs for her work, not for her ego.
She had cures over a period of time. This lasted for months in 1875. And over a period of time, the Mahatmas did try to help her cure the leg. She unfortunately didn't always follow their advice, and the problem would reoccur. We'll get a follow-up on this now. We found out, too, that at this early period, when she first arrived in America, even though her own Mahatma was Morya, she was being trained by the Egyptian brothers, who we refer to as the Brotherhood of Luxor, but they refer to as the Ellorian. Ellora is a place in India, and there are, or were, apparently Mahatmas there. I don't know if they were stationed, but there were quite often Mahatmas going through that area of India, and HBB almost invariably knew when they were nearby.
It's interesting, though, that the Egyptian ones called themselves the Ellorian.
And I think we discussed that. We think that they are affiliated with the group of Mahatmas in South India more so than with the ones in Tibet. Now, keep in mind, every single Mahatma in the world, wherever they may be, is connected with every other Mahatma. There is no divergence, no separateness whatsoever. They work as one single group.
This is very esoteric, and we hear very little of any other brotherhood. That's one of the reasons why this teaching is so unique and special, because we actually have some now exoteric information about one of these secret brotherhoods. And it's not secret to be like, ooh, we're special. It's for all the reasons we've discussed, but it would stand to reason that there are other focal points of masters in other locations. Not too many, but if we had to guess, I don't know, how many do we think there are? 50-ish Mahatmas at the time? Who knows? Maybe even more, but not hundreds of thousands. But there are more, and we don't hear about them for the reasons we've discussed. They work quietly. They don't want to be famous. They don't want to be out in the public.
And at one point, K.H. even said, speaking of the Mahatmas, our numbers are just now diminishing, which meant there were as many that were rising to the challenge as were moving on to other positions in the hierarchy, and possibly even into other areas of our solar system. So that tells me also that there weren't enough advanced people in our world to merit more, because they can always call in extra help if there are so many people that are on the verge of moving forward. But it appears that there are very, very few, relatively speaking, even now. And it's just the way it is. That will increase as time goes on. But those who do advance right now are pioneers in the movement, absolute pioneers. Now, let's go ahead and pick up from there. We're going to find out a little more about what happened with HPB's leg, just a little bit about the end of her period married to this Michael Bettinelli, and then we will find out also what is this great transformation that took place right along the same time. And it's very, very interesting. So, picking up here, remember that Colonel Alcott remarked that both of them were connected with the African section of the Occult Brotherhood. And then later, a very unusual and remarkable change happened over a period of time. And we actually get quite a bit of information of that through letters that HPB wrote home to her family in Russia, trying to explain what happened. This is again from Personal Memoirs of H.P. Blavatsky by Mary K. Neff, a very well-known biographer of HPB.
So we're bringing this information in to bring context to the Mahatma Letters, of course, but this particular extract is from a separate book, which is available.
So these are comments made by Alcott. They were taken out of his book, Old Diary Leaves, but he's reporting on letters that were written by HPB to her family members. One little note here. She talks about two different Veras. She has a sister, Vera Jelahovsky, and that sister also has a daughter named Vera. Her daughter married an Englishman, Charles Johnston, a theosophist who became a renowned scholar in Eastern philosophy, and especially in the religious philosophy of India. So she's known as Vera Johnston.
That's the daughter of Vera.
Yes.
And we'll write in the description the book name and Alcott's book, and it's a little confusing because Alcott's commenting on letters in a different book relating to the process in the Mahatma Letters. So it's actually three books that are being discussed.
Yes. And the reason they are referred to this way is because we need various points of view, and Alcott adds that. So this is the very best way to present it, to condense it.
So who's actually talking here?
This is Alcott quoting from letters she sent to family members in Russia. This first one, he will explain, was to her aunt, who is Madame Fadeyev.
What was this change and when did it take place or culminate? It is easy to answer the second query. During her illness of May and June 1875 at Philadelphia, and that's probably the leg issue.
Yes.
Okay. So Blavatsky is in Philadelphia at the time. What the change was can be explained only by HPB herself. She tried to give her aunt, Madame Fadeyev, and her sister, Madame Jelahovsky, some inkling of it. At this point, we shall draw upon an invaluable source of information secured by Mr. William Q. Judge as editor of The Path. He prevailed upon Mrs. Charles Johnston, niece of HPB, daughter, whose name is Vera, of Madame Vera, the mother, Jelahovsky, to translate from Russian HPB's letters to her family and publish them in The Path from December 1894 to December 1895.
So this is Alcott speaking. At this point, when they were published, 1894, HPB had died 3 years earlier. But Mrs. Johnston, the niece, and her husband were both very prominent members of the Theosophical Society. W.Q. Judge requested of her to translate some of these letters because they contained valuable information.
So I apologize, we might need a little bit more clarification. We're time jumping quite a bit too. We're now reading something that was published in 1895, which is after HPB died. She died in what year again?
1891.
1891. But we're talking about events that took place in
1875.
Wasn't that the year that the TS was?
Yes, but this was early in the spring and summer of 1875, and the TS wasn't organized until they started talking about it around September, and then in November it was finally organized.
But in our whole process here, we're on session, 50-something. We're way past 1875.
We're at 1882 as far as the letters, but we have to go back and collect information that will help us understand the letters.
The leg situation happened in 1875? Mm-hmm. But that was brought up in the letters that we're currently on, though.
Right. Of course, they're going to refer to past events.
Okay.
Remember, they're trying to make Sinnett understand why HPB has so many people angry at her and why she does have some problems that are legitimate that they're complaining about.
We'll try to make this understandable. If it's still not clear, please comment and we'll reply. So Alcott is now still commenting on letters from HPB to her family. He says, Mrs. Johnston writes of the Philadelphia illness relating to the leg situation, in quotes, at one time, HPB was exceedingly ill with advanced rheumatism in her leg. Doctors told her it was gangrened and considered her case hopeless, but she was successfully treated by a Negro who was sent to her by the Sahib.
Sahib is Morya, her Mahatma. And like I said, there were several attempts to cure her. And I don't know which one was the Negro because she doesn't refer to any of the people as being black. So that's unknown.
She writes to Madame Jelahovsky, he has cured me entirely.
That means Morya, the Sahib, but through this Negro that he sent.
And just about this time, I have begun to feel a very strange duality. Several times a day, I feel that beside me there is someone else, quite separable from me, present in my body.
Now, this is the first time that we ever hear of any part of this, and that's why it's so earth-shattering. It's such a change that it changes everything.
Let me read that last thing again. Several times a day, I feel that beside me there is someone else, quite separable from me, present in my body. It's funny, she says beside me, separable from her, but present in her body at the same time.
Yeah, so her first perception was duality. It was like someone coming in, but she was still in her body too.
Oh, I took that as how that entity was also present in her body.
Well, it is, but it's like a dual consciousness.
Yes,
exactly
yes,
what
both.
you said.
Mm-hmm. I never lose the consciousness of my personality. What I feel is as if I were keeping silent and the other one, the lodger who is in me, was speaking with my tongue. Wow, this is a different kind of occupation, possession, a different kind. Usually we hear of like, what is it, mesmerism?
We hear about trance mediums like
yes.
St. Moses, but they're completely unconscious.
Right, they don't know, but she's conscious.
Someone has to tell them afterwards what happened.
So she's explaining this dual consciousness, this duality. For instance, I know that I had never been in the places which are described by my other me, but this other one, the second me, does not lie when he tells about places and things unknown to me, because he has actually seen them and known them well.
So she's experiencing past events as if she were that person.
This person is communicating, though, to someone in the room. Mm-hmm. She says he's using her voice.
Sometimes, yes, absolutely.
Or sometimes he's talking to her.
Right.
Okay.
And remember, at this point, she doesn't seem to have been warned that this was going to take place. So she's just experiencing this as it happens.
And she's probably still recovering from her illness.
Yes. And she had, remember, been through this horrible initiation period. This is the reward, so to speak, of having passed that initiation.
I have given it up. Let my fate conduct me as its own sweet will. And besides, what am I to do? It would be perfectly ridiculous if I were to deny the possession of knowledge avowed by my number two, giving occasion to the people around me to imagine that I kept them in the dark for modesty's sake.
And that's exactly what happened. People would say, why are you pretending that you don't know this? You obviously know it. And she can't really explain to them. She knows more or less what the reason is, but she knows they're not going to understand it. So she's in a predicament.
In the night, when I'm alone in my bed, the whole life of my number two passes before my eyes. Wow. So she's seeing the life of
Morya. She is seeing everything that brought him up to the point where he is now.
I wonder if that's intentional on his part, if that's just
of course
a byproduct of this process.
Remember the example of the chela and the Mahatma being so in sync, and the chela can absorb as much of the Mahatma's understanding and wisdom as they are qualified to absorb. Wow. And she has a very, very high threshold of that.
And vice versa. That's why they won't do this with just any old person.
Right. Of course. It is way, way too intimate of a connection.
But I wonder, she says his whole life passes. I wonder if that's something he's doing intentionally, like, here, I'm going to show you my life, or if that's just a result of this connection.
He's completely aware of it, whether or not he's making it happen. I don't know, but it could very well be that it is automatic unless he puts a stopper somewhere.
I just wasn't sure why she needs that. Like, why does she need to see his life? Maybe that's just, she needs that. I don't know. She needs to see that.
Because she is going to start writing for them. Remember, there is no theosophical literature at this point. None.
1975. When did ISIS come out?
1877.
Okay, there you go.
So it could not have happened without this.
Okay. So this is part of the process. My gosh. And I do not see myself at all, but quite a different person, different in race and different in feelings, because she's experiencing it through his eyes. Wow. This is no mediumship and by no means an impure power. For that, it has too strong an ascendancy over us all, leading us into better ways.
So this isn't like the dweller on the threshold testing someone. This is completely different. It's no deception. It's nothing at all like that. It is this amazing process of raising her consciousness, awareness, and even experience.
Yeah.
She's experiencing the life of a Mahatma.
Wow. That's incredible. It's enough for me to enter the room where a seance is being held, to stop all kinds of phenomena at once, especially materialization.
Whereas before, she would come into a seance and all of a sudden the type of entities that appeared would be very different. Now she comes into a seance, and because the Mahatma is with her, all of that stops, because that's so far beneath the level of his aura, his vibration that he carries with him. She's now got that with her.
No, this is altogether of a higher order. But phenomena of another sort take place more and more frequently under the direction of my number two.
So, yeah, totally different phenomena than what occurred with the spiritualist mediums. Now, this is Mrs. Johnston still continuing, and it could be a different letter. It doesn't matter. These are various quotes from various letters to family members, but this is still one to Mrs. Johnston.
Mrs. Johnston continues, the newspapers gave accounts of certain of these phenomena and described the appearance of astral visitors, amongst others a Hindu. HPB comments, I see this Hindu every day, just as I might see any other living person, with the only difference that he looks to me more ethereal and more transparent. Formerly, I kept silent, but now they have become visible to other people as well.
And she says they, so apparently it's more than one person sometimes.
He, the Hindu, appears and advises us as to our conduct and our writing. He evidently knows everything that is going on, even to the thoughts of other people, and makes me express his knowledge. Sometimes it seems to me that he overshadows the whole of me, simply entering me like a kind of volatile essence, penetrating all my pores and dissolving in me. Why volatile, though?
Volatile meaning the scientific use in chemistry, where it fills any available space.
Oh, okay. Then we too, TWO, both of us, are able to speak to other people. And then I begin to understand and remember sciences and languages, everything he instructs me in, even when he is not with me anymore. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Can I sign up for that?
Yeah, exactly.
Can I do that? I want to.
So, yeah, these people have 16 years of university training, can't come anywhere close to this.
It seems like, yeah, let's volunteer for that. But remember, there's so much more involved than just saying, yeah, I'm ready.
No. Keep in mind, so far in 140 years, she's the only one that has reached that level of preparedness.
We should make a checklist of reasons that she was able to do this. And even though she smoked, she was overweight, but there's a whole bunch of reasons why.
Yeah, and we've expressed some of those as we go along, but towards the end of our series, several months from now, we're going to cover some other topics, and that's going to be one.
Only later did she name this voice as Master. I never tell anyone here about my experience with the voice. When I try to assure them that I have never been in Mongolia and that I do not know either Sanskrit or Hebrew or ancient European languages, they do not believe me, what you were saying earlier.
Exactly.
How is this, they say, you have never been there, and yet you describe it all so accurately? You do not know the languages, and yet you translate straight from the originals.
And remember, she had university professors and doctors that would come to consult with her, and they were just astounded at the information they received. She'll say more about that.
They think that I have some mysterious reasons for secrecy. It is an awkward thing for me to deny when everyone has heard me discussing various Indian dialects with a lecturer who has spent 20 years in India. That's cool. All I can say is either they are mad or I am a changeling.
Yeah, we learned what that was.
Shapeshifter.
Yeah, so we know what that is now. And then later, she wrote to her aunt again, Madame Fadeev.
Later she wrote, in our society, there are a few exceedingly learned members, for instance, Professor Wilder, one of the first archaeologists and orientalists in the United States. And all these people come to me to be taught and swear that I know all kinds of Eastern languages and sciences much better than themselves. That's a fact. And it's as bad to run up against a fact as against a pitchfork. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
That's LOL.
Some people would rather run into a pitchfork than a fact. They have their alternate facts, otherwise known as lies. Some people do not like facts.
So then tell me, how could it have happened that I, whose learning was so awfully lame up to the age of 40, have suddenly become a phenomenon of learning in the eyes of people who are really learned? This fact is an impenetrable mystery of nature. I, a psychological problem and an enigma for future generations, a sphinx. Just fancy that I, who never had the slightest idea about physics or chemistry or zoology or anything else, have now suddenly become able to write whole dissertations about them.
And the cool thing about this is that it's not just that entity is occupying her body. As she said, I'm learning this as I go. So after a while, I know all of that, even when the other entity is nowhere around.
She's not just being like a channel. She's not just a channel.
Like Edgar Cayce.
Right. She's actually being taught as well in the process.
And that's why, remember, one of the qualifications is strong intellect. She was extremely intelligent, even though she had zero university training, none whatsoever.
She was somewhat of a linguist, though, right? She did speak, what, French, Russian, English?
Yes, and that was what educated women in those days had, because they had tutors at home. They had opportunities to learn languages, things that would enhance their usefulness as a woman. So, yeah, they were allowed to learn languages and geography and a few things like that. But sciences, no, you can't learn science.
I enter into discussions with men of science, into disputes, out of which I often emerge triumphant. Whatever I happen to read, it all seems familiar to me. I find mistakes in the most learned articles by Tyndall, Herbert Spencer, Huxley, and others.
Yeah, all of the most famous scientists of the day.
If some archaeologist happens to call on me on taking leave, he is certain to assure me that I have made clear to him the meaning of various monuments, and pointed out things to him of which he had never dreamed. All the symbols of antiquity and their secret meaning come into my hand and stand there before my eyes as soon as the conversation touches on them. All I can say is that someone positively inspires me. More than this, someone enters me. It is not I who talk and write. It is something within me, my higher and luminous self, that thinks and writes for me. It's not actually her higher and luminous self.
Remember, we've mentioned before that it is not our personality that can communicate directly with the Mahatmas. Your personality has to open up the connection to your higher self, and that's where the communication takes place.
That was a major topic of the weekend I just had. I just came back from teaching the philosophy portion of a 200-hour teacher training, and a huge portion of that yoga philosophy was about how to tap into this part of us that is wise and peaceful and calm and knows our dharma and our purpose, and this is our higher self, which we're talking about. And one of the best ways to get there, it's right from Eckhart Tolle, is be present. Be present and allow joy to flow into anything you do, not just things that you think are enjoyable. And I jokingly but seriously call it the portal of joy. And you just said it's a connection to your higher self. It's a portal of joy. If you can be present in life and not think about past and future and allow joy, literal joy, to flow into what you do, even if you don't think you enjoy it, that's the connection that is required for this communication to happen. Once you can be that joyous higher self without anxiety too much, without worry too much, being present, and that's where this kind of communication is possible. Very cool. Mm-hmm. My higher luminous self. Okay. The one thing I know is that now, when I'm about to reach old age, I have become a sort of storehouse for somebody else's knowledge. Someone comes and envelops me as a misty cloud and all at once pushes me out of myself, and then I am not I anymore, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, but someone else. Someone strong and powerful, born in a totally different region of the world. And as to myself, it is almost as if I were asleep, or lying by, not quite conscious, not in my own body, but close by, held only by a thread which ties me to it. Earlier, she said she was totally conscious.
It depends on the circumstances, but keep in mind, this is what's so cool. Most people are all about gaining knowledge and wisdom for me and how I can use it and enhance my ego and become more powerful or whatever. Mahatmas have no use for that because they become far more powerful as a group than as any individual. In fact, not a single one of them can exist on their own. Mm-hmm. They can't even operate as a real Mahatma without this connection. Mm-hmm. So until you are willing to give up your personal need, your sense of importance as an individual, you're not even a candidate. Mm. So keep that in mind. You have to be willing to leave all of that behind. We're going to cover a little more about that topic soon. Mm.
What year again was she writing this? 1875?
Well, they're not necessarily right in 1875, but within the months after the experience occurred.
At times I see and hear everything quite clearly. I am perfectly conscious of what my body is saying and doing, or at least its new possessor. I even understand and remember it all so well that afterwards I can repeat it and even write down his words. At such a time, I see awe and fear on the faces of Alcott and others, and follow with interest the way in which he, half pityingly, regards them out of my own eyes and teaches them with my physical tongue. I'm going to also say it's interesting that all this just starts happening around this time, because if the society is being created this year, approximately 1875, I would have thought that she was in this kind of communication with them for a long time prior to that.
And I was under that impression too. So even though I've read this before, it has consolidated it in my brain now. Now I realize this was necessary, this stage, so that she could do what she started doing just a few months later.
It would stand to reason that clearly she was in communication with them. Obviously, she's known about Morya since she was a young girl. But it would also stand to reason that their communication wasn't as frequent or as clear or as intimate as this until much later. What was her age approximately at 1875?
44.
She said she was in her 40s. Okay. So for the past 20 years or so, there probably was communication, maybe increasingly slowly in frequency until this, where it like skyrocketed.
Yeah, skyrocket is exactly right. Remember, we just recently learned that until this very period, she communicated more often with the Brotherhood in Africa than she did with these guys. But now she has made enough progress, especially with this last trial period and initiation that she successfully passed. That opened up a whole new world of opportunities.
But even at this point, the pieces were already in motion to create the society. I mean, Alcott was there. They were already doing it.
Yeah, it would have happened one way or the other, but this increased the possible effects enormously. But it also increased the trolls that were going to attack it because they hate stuff like that.
Do we know if the Egyptian Brotherhood was guiding them to create the society, or was it always Morya and KH?
As far as I can remember, it was mostly Morya and KH, but obviously the Brotherhood in Africa was completely aware of their project. So they were also enabling everything to be set up and aimed toward that direction.
I guess we need to keep in mind, too, that Morya and KH were the ones who received that kind of exception from the chiefs to do it. And I don't think it really was the Egyptian guys who begged and pleaded, the higher-ups, the Chohan, can we do this experiment? The experiment, the society was KH and Morya.
Right.
Pretty much.
And remember, KH was the one who dedicated a large portion of his life to going out into the outer world, right among the English people and Europeans, to their universities to be trained in their culture, their ways, their language, so that he could do this very thing.
The way she's speaking here, how she's saying someone and his, she knew very well who it was, but she's being careful not to divulge his name.
Yes, and remember, her relatives are devout Orthodox Christians.
Okay.
And when I say Orthodox, I mean Eastern Orthodox.
Russian Orthodox Christian.
So she doesn't want to offend them, but she also needs them to understand why her beliefs and philosophies are changing so drastically from what she had been taught as a child. Now, after that long side trip, which was necessary to give the background information so we can understand this thoroughly, we are in the middle of a very important letter 92, where KH is explaining to Sinnett why there are certain things about HPB that other people simply cannot understand. And one of the things that many people insist is that maybe she's a changeling. She used to be pretty honest, but I'm not so sure now. And he's pointing out in the letter, yes, she does have some faults, and we recognize that more than anyone else, including yourselves. But do you really want to know what her biggest fault is? Her biggest problem? I'm going to tell you. And we needed all of that background to learn that. The reason he's talking about that is because of all of these enemies that are growing by the day, and they're attacking her one way and the other. And even Sinnett is beginning to be affected by the statements of these people and saying, ooh, maybe she's not the person I thought she was. And that's why he's carefully explaining everything in such detail. We needed to know the information ourselves if we want to understand what and why KH is presenting to Sinnett. So let's pick up there in the midst of letter number 92.
And now, do you want to know how far she is guilty? Know then that if she ever became guilty of real deliberate deception, owing to that zeal, it was when, in the presence of phenomena produced, she kept constantly denying, except in the matter of such trifles as bells and raps, that she had anything to do with their production personally.
And when he says, owing to her zeal, it was C.C. Massey that came up with that phrase. And it was in a letter that C.C. Massey wrote to K.H. He said, I see tremendous problems. And remember that two of these enemies of HPB were working really hard to try to turn C.C. Massey against her, because up until now, he's been a defender of hers, but now he's being affected by these two enemies and their planting of suspicions. And he's the one that said, maybe it's because of her great zeal that she has defects.
From your European standpoint, it is downright deception, a big thundering lie. From our Asiatic standpoint, though, an imprudent, blamable zeal, an untruthful exaggeration, or what a Yankee would call a blazing cock-a-hoop. Meant for the benefit of the brothers, but nevertheless, if we look into the motive, sublime, self-denying, noble, and meritorious zeal, then yes, in that, and that alone, she often became guilty of deceiving her friends.
So, what is a blazing cock-a-hoop?
Oh my gosh.
It's the crowing of a rooster, someone who is exulting because they won a contest or a game or something. And it's like they're crowing about it. And
victory dance.
That's exactly it, a victory dance. What did he say? You say, there it is. That's why she is deceptive.
She could never be made to realize the utter uselessness, the danger of such a zeal, and how mistaken she was in her notions that she was adding to our glory, whereas, by often attributing to us phenomena of the most childish nature, She only lowered us in the public opinion and substantiated the claim of her enemies that she was just a medium. But it was of no use. In accordance with our rules, Morya was not permitted to forbid her such a course. She had to be allowed full freedom of action, the liberty of creating causes that became, over time, her scourge, her public pillory. He could at best forbid her producing phenomena, and to this he resorted as often as he could, to the great dissatisfaction of her friends and fellow theosophists. Was it lack of intellectual perceptions in her? Certainly not. It is a psychological disease over which she has little, if any, control. Her impulsive nature, as you have correctly inferred in your reply, is always ready to carry her beyond the boundaries of truth into the regions of exaggeration. Nevertheless, without a shadow of suspicion that she is thereby deceiving her friends or abusing their great trust in her. The stereotyped phrase, "It is not I can do nothing by myself. It is all they, the brothers. I am but their humble and devoted slave and instrument," is a downright fib. She can and did produce phenomena, owing to her natural powers combined with several long years of regular training, and her phenomena are sometimes better, more wonderful, and far more perfect than those of some high-initiated chelas, whom she surpasses in artistic taste and purely Western appreciation of art. As, for instance, in the instantaneous production of pictures, witness her portrait of the fakir, Tiravala, mentioned in Hints. What was Hints again?
Hints is a pamphlet that was turned into a small book. Answers that Hume wrote to a couple of different theosophists who asked questions about the Mahatmas, and he defended them very ably in very long letters that were published in the Theosophist, and they were so good that someone put them together as a small book.
Wow.
And it was called Hints on Esoteric Theosophy.
Mm-hmm. Witness her portrait of the fakir, Tiravala, mentioned in Hints, and compared with my portrait by D.K. Notwithstanding all the superiority of his powers as compared to hers, his youth as contrasted with her old age, and the undeniable and important advantage he possesses of having never brought his pure unalloyed magnetism in direct contact with the great impurity of your world and society, yet he will never be able to produce such a picture simply because he is unable to conceive it in his mind and Tibetan thought. Now that's DK we're talking about?
Yes. DK could do amazing phenomena on his own, but he didn't have the Western concept of art, of artistic expression. So his was probably more simplistic, more naive in a way, I guess you could say. And on the other hand, HPB was artistic. She wasn't a great artist, but she had very good ability to envision things and to see them in certain ways. Some of her cartoon drawings are amazingly funny, and some of them are more like a political sort of cartoon you might see in a newspaper. She was very good at drawing, sketching very quickly, and it looked quite artistic. So what is her big problem? That she reveres the Mahatmas so highly that she thinks she's doing them a favor by over-exaggerating. Oh, I can't do anything without them. And in a way, she's absolutely right. She would be absolutely nothing special if it were not for her connection with the Mahatmas. But she did have a connection that no one else had or has achieved since her. And so she did have that, but she was being overly modest. The Mahatmas, as we know, don't do that sort of thing. If they know something, if they have a talent and an ability that they want you to know, they will tell you straight out. And it's not bragging. It's the rest of us that sometimes have false modesty, and that's what it was false modesty. She was kind of diminishing herself, thinking that that would make their appearance in the outer world that much greater. And it actually had the opposite effect. And that's what they're saying. Another thing he said earlier was that we let our chelas and potential chelas experience the results of their own actions. And he'll point out, unless it is something that someone did to them that has nothing to do with karma, attacked them viciously, and that is not due to any karma on that person's part, then we will help them. But otherwise, if it's part of their karma, hands off. We just stand back and let them experience the results of what they've created. They created it, let them deal with it. And we see that time and time again. Like, for example, with the little man, Babaji. He made a serious mistake, let him deal with it. Same with Fern. He had made numerous mistakes. They warn him about it. They give him a chance to straighten it out, and then they back off. And they either take their advice or they don't. So we need to learn that. There's a term for that. It's called, among others, divine indifference. Divine indifference. The Mahatmas have less of it than the Dhyan Chohans do. Because what have we learned? The higher you get in the hierarchy, the more they back off from interacting with humans, to the point that the very highest members don't even seem like individuals or persons. They are forces in nature. They operate on a gigantic scale, not with individual people. It's the lower members of the hierarchy that take on the role of interacting, and that sometimes creates karma for them. They're willing to do it because someone has to do it. Someone has to help these poor orphans in the outer world gain the knowledge and experience to where they can make the leap to this understanding of how life really works.
And that is the sacrifice that the Mahatmas have chosen to make. They're choosing that dharma for this physical incarnation. We've gone back and forth on whether or not they've actually reached moksha, which is the end of the earthly cycle, and they could have gone off elsewhere, but they've chosen to take a physical body. We've talked about how the masters are either at that level or close to it. And it's a sacrifice. Regardless of that, it's a sacrifice to do this.
Normally it's at the level of Buddha, which is, remember, adept is the next level that we will work on after we have completed everything we need to know in the human level of evolution. Adept or Mahatma is the next level, and you can imagine how long that is. And then becoming a Buddha is next after that.
So the Mahatmas don't have a choice?
I don't think they do.
So they have not finished their cycle of rebirth then. They have to be reborn.
I believe so. Now, they don't necessarily have to take a physical body, not all of them.
But they still have to come
and participate at least mentally with the rest of them. They provide really important background experience for the rest of the Mahatma. There are many levels of Mahatmas and Chohans.
This is
and most of them, we have no idea how they interact with the Mahatmas we do know about.
This is an interesting clue on this. You know, in the spiritual world, many people think that as soon as you're like, okay, I'm enlightened, I'm done being reborn, I'm free of the wheel of karma. It's not really that simple. These masters are, in many respects, perfect. They've learned everything on earth, almost. But now that they are at that level, they're kind of required to now start helping more.
And they are still learning.
They are still learning. So they have not reached moksha yet. They're not done with the wheel of karma yet.
I am not an expert. I can't say for sure, but that's where I am right now in my understanding. We have to constantly adjust.
It's not black and white. And it probably evolves too. I mean, there are exceptions being made too. Even the Chohans are making some exceptions to the rules to experiment.
I've noticed that even the Mahatmas are still learning what is what in the world. I suspect that they are a little more liberal than they used to be in the way they looked at things, because remember, many of them became a Mahatma thousands and thousands of years ago. So they lived in the outer world at a time where everything was black and white, cut and dried.
And we're still a relatively new system since the Buddha, 500 BC. That was the first time someone from our system has reached that moksha, basically. So we are still young relatively speaking.
Right. And remember, he was the result of a sixth round individual, so far the only one, because normally you can only get one round ahead of the rest of humanity. He, through some intervention, was able to make 2 rounds of evolution ahead of the rest of humanity.
Maybe we needed it.
And that's exactly it. An exception had to be made, but
somebody had to go. Yeah.
The much higher Dian Chohans to approve that.
Put on this rocket pack, Siddhartha. You're going to go faster.
Yeah,
We're going to get ready. We're going to launch you into...
Yeah. No, that's what it takes. Remember, that was only 2,600 years ago. Not even a blink of an eye in evolutionary history. The Mahatmas are still looking for pioneers. They are needed everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Thus, while foisting upon us all manner of foolish, often clumsy and suspected phenomena, she has most undeniably been helping us in many instances, saving us sometimes as much as 2/3 of the power used, and when reproached, for often we are unable to prevent her doing it on her end of the line, answering that she had no need of it,
meaning the power,
and that her only joy was to be of some use to us. And thus she kept on killing herself inch by inch, ready to give for our benefit and glory, as she thought, her lifeblood, drop by drop, and yet invariably denying before witnesses that she had anything to do with it.
In retrospect, 140 years later, or whatever it is, 138 years later from 1882, it's easy to see that that was a big mistake on her part. But the Mahatmas didn't hold it against her one iota. They let her experience the results of her overenthusiasm. And the result is that she died far earlier than she could have.
And this is a specific result of producing too much phenomena?
It's a part of that, and trying so hard to convince people. She said, close to the end of her life, I learned far too late. It's about quality, not quantity. If they had found 5 individuals and not spread all of the information so widely and attracted all of these negative trolls that attacked them from every angle, they could have helped those 5 people, and then things would have gone a little more smoothly. Anytime truth comes into the world, it's going to be attacked. It's just the way life works. And if you're trying to shake up the way people think, you're fighting uphill. Your enemy has the advantage because of sheer numbers.
I mean, the masters didn't really discourage spreading theosophy, though.
No, they wanted it spread, but they weren't even sure what the best method was. So everything was an experiment, everything. So I don't want to blame her whatsoever, but what we can do is to learn from her experience.
Yeah, of course.
And there are many things she could have done differently. So let us not make those same mistakes. Let us not work ourselves to death trying to convince people who really don't care. Forget about those people. Focus on the ones who are actually trying.
This is a direct correlation to this incessant desire in the world to raise Kundalini and to become super psychic and powerful. It's dangerous to ourselves and to others. If we're not supposed to have it in this life to do something with it, even she was harmed by it.
Yes, and it's because she didn't husband her resources. She didn't look and say, okay, is this the best use of this power? In her mind, it was. They're saying, as it turned out, it wasn't.
Well, she was sanctioned by the master. Like all the phenomena, she was allowed to do it.
Yes, but he's going to point out that Morya tried more than once to get her to slow down or stop on those, and in fact, ordered her sometimes.
Think about this, too. She was so much more reserved and less flamboyant than most mediums. And mediums do have a certain degree of ability. And think about how much danger, we've said this 100 times, how much danger the mediums are causing themselves. And she is far less show-offy than they are, right? So think about how many problems you're causing yourself if you're a medium producing phenomena all the time.
One thing they pointed out earlier was that CCM even had to admit that he could see no reason why she would invent any of this because she didn't benefit monetarily from it or in any other way. It didn't enhance her standing in life. It didn't make her richer at all. It made her poorer.
That's interesting. Would you call this sublime, albeit foolish, self-abnegation dishonest? We do not, nor shall we ever consent to regard it in such a light. To come to the point, moved by that feeling and firmly believing at the time, because she was allowed to, that Horichand was a worthy chela of the yogi Dayananda, she allowed CCM and all those who were present to labor under the impression that it was Horichand who had produced the phenomena, and then went on rattling for a fortnight of Swami's great powers and of the virtues of Horichand, his mouthpiece.
So remember that she does this a lot. She gets carried away with her praise of people.
Horichand certainly was a chela of Dayananda, though not very worthy, for he had always been a selfish, plodding rascal, secretly paid by the late Gayakwar.
Gayakwar was a kind of equivalent of a minor Raja in Goa, which is north of Bombay. And each area has their own form of royalty or whoever's in charge of that particular ethnic group. And Gaekwar was one of those. And apparently the Gaekwar of this area was paying Horichand to manipulate something in his favor.
Oh, wow. How terribly she was punished. Everyone in Bombay knows. First, the chela, turning a traitor to his master and his allies and a common thief. Then the great yogi, the Luther of India.
That's Swami Dayananda.
Wow. Sacrificing her and HSO, that's Alcott, to his insatiable ambition. Very naturally, while Hurichand's treason, shocking as it appeared at the time to CCM and other theosophists, left her unscarred, for Swami himself, having been robbed, defended the founders, and the treachery of the supreme chief of the theosophists of the Arya Samaj was not regarded in its true light. It wasn't he that had played false, but the whole blame fell upon the unfortunate and too devoted woman who, after extolling him to the sky, was compelled in self-defense to expose his malafides.
The opposite of bona fides.
Malafides, and true motives in the theosophist.
So Harichand was always deceptive, but the Swami was actually a good person, had good intentions for a long time until he became quite famous. And then his ethics decreased and he published something negative about HPB, and she felt obligated to reveal in the Theosophist that he was no longer this good person that he still pretended to be. So he had changed. He was the changeling, not HPB.
Such is the true history with regard to her deception, or at best, dishonest zeal.
In quotes.
No doubt she has merited a portion of the blame. Most undeniably, she is given to exaggeration in general, and when it becomes a question of puffing up those she is devoted to, her enthusiasm knows no limits. Thus, she has made of Morya an Apollo of Belvedere. What does that mean?
The statue, Apollo, the epitome of masculinity.
Okay, of Belvedere.
Gorgeous, handsome man.
She is made of Morya an Apollo of Belvedere, the glowing description of whose physical beauty made him more than once react in anger and break his pipe while swearing like a true Christian. We've heard that before. We've heard that quote.
Well, this is the quote
we use.
Talked about out of sequence, but this is where it comes in to the letters.
Okay. Like a true Christian. And thus, under her eloquent phraseology, I myself had the pleasure of hearing myself metamorphosed into an angel of purity and light, shorn of his wings.
So, yeah, she gets carried away. When she's talking about the Mahatmas, she just becomes ecstatic and visionary, and they're like, oh, please, this is not helpful.
We cannot help feeling at times angry with, but more often laughing at her.
Yeah, poor thing. They don't disrespect her. They find it amusing, but it's almost painful for them to see, and they have more pity than anything else.
Yet the feeling that dictates all this ridiculous, effusive praise is too ardent, too sincere and true, not to be respected or even ignored. I do not believe I was ever so profoundly touched by anything I witnessed in all my life as I was with the poor old creature's ecstatic rapture when meeting both of us recently in our own bodies, one after 3 years, the other after nearly 2 years' separation in the flesh.
She hadn't seen KH since the very beginning of these letters. When she was traveling up north, remember, and he had traveled across northern India to consult with the Mahachohan about Hume's offer. And then she was completely thrown off balance by the article that appeared in a newspaper that wasn't supposed to be published about phenomena that occurred in the presence of several distinguished British citizens. And they were upset about it, and she was beside herself. So KH had to go out of his way to go meet up with her and calm her down.
Even our phlegmatic Morya was thrown off balance by such an exhibition, of which he was chief hero. He had to use his power and plunge her into a profound sleep. Otherwise, she would have burst some blood vessel, including kidneys, liver, and her interiors, to use our friend Oxley's favorite expression, in her delirious attempt to flatten her nose against his riding mantle, besmeared with the Sikkim mud.
So can you visualize this? Remember when the Chela S. Ramaswamy here saw Morya, his profound respect? Hers wasn't so much that as it was just sheer unbridled joy and excitement. And so he had to plunge her into a coma, basically, to keep her from exploding.
If anyone has read our book, we have the story of why excitement isn't always helpful, and we have 2 stories. They're both sad. One is when the old lady wins the Publishers Clearinghouse, and Ed McMahon shows up with the check at her door, and she gets so excited she has a heart attack and dies. So this is an example of emotions not being helpful.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. If you're young and healthy, waste your energy if you want. But if you're fragile, and she was, then you have to be extremely careful. I have to do it all the time. Even the slightest emotion, I stop mentally and I can see my energy level dropping.
And when I do it, sometimes I knock things over and break things because it's never a great idea. It might seem like it is in the moment, but yeah.
And the Mahatmas make every effort to stifle that completely because there is no good reason to explode in excitement ever. And it takes a long time. Even they have to work at containing themselves sometimes.
We both laughed, yet could we feel anything but touched? Of course, she's utterly unfit for a true adept. Really?
Well, yes. So the first part, we both laughed because you can imagine the scenario. But could we feel anything but touched? They are so kind. They really are. And so when they saw how excited she was, of course they're going to be touched by that. They are sentimental. They have both expressed the fact that they really yearn for the day when their beloved country, India, regains its place in spiritual leadership in the world.
Her nature is too passionately affectionate, and we have no right to indulge in personal attachments and feelings. You can never know her as we do, and therefore none of you will ever be able to judge her impartially. You see the surface of things and what you would term virtue regarding only appearances, but we judge only after having tested the object to its profoundest depth, and generally leave the appearances to take care of themselves. In your opinion, HPB is, at best, for those who like her despite herself, a quaint, strange woman, a psychological riddle, impulsive and kind-hearted, yet not free from vice of untruth. We, on the other hand, under the garb of eccentricity and folly, find a profounder wisdom in her inner self than you will ever find yourselves able to perceive. Let me read that again. We, on the other hand, under the garb of eccentricity and folly, find a profounder wisdom in her inner self than you will ever find yourselves able to perceive. In the superficial details of her homely, hard-working, commonplace daily life and affairs, you discern but impracticality, womanly impulses, often absurdity and folly.
All you see is how absurd she is and ridiculous and silly.
We, on the other hand, focus daily upon traits of her inner nature, the most delicate and refined, and which would require years of constant and keen observation to draw out of the depth of that most subtle of mysteries, the human mind, and one of her most complicated machines, HPB's mind, and thus learn to know her true inner self.
And keep in mind that this has been an issue for a long, long time. He has pointed out time after time that the Englishman and all English people judge on appearances. Doesn't matter what your lack is morally, ethically, anything else, as long as everything looks good on the exterior. That's all that counts, whether it's in religion, politics, personal conduct, anything. As long as you have a good reputation and everything looks copacetic, you're in. And they don't see anything that way. They always look for the inner qualities.
All this you are at liberty to tell CCM. I have closely watched him and feel pretty certain that what you will tell him will have far more effect upon him than what a dozen KHs might tell him personally. Imperator stands between us two and will, I'm afraid, stand thus forever. His loyalty to and faith in the assertions of a European living friend can never be shaken by the assurances to the contrary made by Asiatics who, to him, if not mere figments of the imagination, are unscrupulous confederates.
Earlier in this letter, you may not remember, he said that C.C. Massey was a very kind and good person, and that if he realized how deeply he had hurt HPB, he would be more upset than anyone else. But he's also saying here that if the Mahatmas wrote back to him what they're going to tell Sinnett to relay to him, he would discard it because he puts more emphasis in St. Moses' spirit guides than he does in the idea of the Mahatmas. So even though he's a very good person, remember his one major problem is weakness, and he also doesn't have discernment.
But I would, if possible, show to you his great injustice and the wrong done by him to an innocent woman, at any rate comparatively innocent. However crazy an enthusiast, I pledge to you my word of honor that she was never a deceiver, nor has she ever purposely uttered an untruth, though her position becomes often difficult, and she has to conceal a number of things as pledged to by her solemn vows. And now I have done with the question.
That's a good place to stop for this session. We're going to finish up this letter 92, a long one, but a very important one. And we've learned some really good external information that helps us to understand HPB far better than any of her co-workers understood her. But we have the advantage of 140 years distance in time to see it much more objectively. She was hopelessly misunderstood, and she never, ever held any grudge against anybody for not knowing who she was. We saw in the way that she became so intimately merged with the consciousness of her Mahatma, Morya, that it's understandable now why later in life she sometimes was very unclear about her own experiences and when they occurred. And we can see why. Her consciousness was completely merged with that of Morya. How could she separate out 12 years later which was which and what was her memories and what was Morya's memories? And I don't think anyone has ever pointed this out before.
Interesting, yeah.
So she was a complete enigma to most Europeans. All right, We'll keep going with this letter 92, and thank you for following along, and we really appreciate all that you do to keep our series going here.
Thank you.